Hello, this is Chris Nelson from evolveconsciousness.org. I will be reading the last part in the Language and Reality series, part 5, called Logic. It's also an addendum on previous material in the other 4 parts that weren't included, that I later formulated notes, or I forgot to add notes. Anyways, there'll be addendums in here. So, Logic, Language and Reality, part 5. Part 1 and 2 in the Language and Reality series dealt with the relation of logic and grammar. This is the last article in this series, briefly describing more aspects of logic itself. Please go read the other parts to understand what I have already explained about grammar and its interconnected relation to logic and reality. Part 4 also explains the central importance of logic in the Trivium method. And the content is introduction, grammar, logic spiral, thought and consciousness, contradiction and unity consciousness, ratio, images in the mind, meaning and definition, and finally logic and processing. The featured image is logic, non-contradiction, the art of thinking. There's 2 aspects to logic, the induction and deduction. These have previously been talked about in part 1 and 2. Induction has enumerative, intuitive, and dialectical modes, and the dialectical is also a bridge between induction and deduction. Induction and deduction feed back between each other from the small particulars to the larger universals, as was shown in the induction-deduction spiral previously. And deduction deals with identity definition and uses syllogism. Induction is terms and propositions from experience through conception. Reality is induced, and thoughts about what is in reality, and it's the material of reasoning. Because when we formulate terms and propositions and we have thoughts about reality that's induced, the conceptions. Deduction is the consistency, harmony, and non-contradiction of thought, and it's reasoning itself. So induction is like the extraction, abstraction of material in the parts. We distill from those parts a concentrate. That concentrate is a universal. Deduction takes those distilled, extracted bits, the universals, and processes them to produce something else. The mind is the machinery that transforms natural products from induction into something else with deduction. Section 5.1 Introduction. Law of non-contradiction, LNC, or principle of non-contradiction, PNC. The law of non-contradiction, or the principle of non-contradiction, nothing can both be and not be, is a foundation for correct, accurate, proper, optimal, right, good, and true thought about anything in existence. The law of identity, whatever is, and the law of excluded middle, everything must either be or not be, are variations of the same principle found throughout all of reality. This understanding is the core of the law of logic. This is a first principle of reality. Those who fail to understand and use the law of logic correctly are failing to perceive, conceive, understand, and navigate reality. This ignorance of logic is related to accepting unreality as reality, wrong as right, evil as good, falsity as truth, due to not removing the contradictions in the various conceptual frameworks that provide us with our understanding of reality. Ignorance of grammar existing in reality will also sustain falsity and contradiction. Induction and deduction are both forms of logical processing. The higher second-order logical processing is the deduction to verify the conceptions formulated from the first-order inductive logic. That is to say, non-contradictory identification. We feed back between the two, refining, distilling, and concentrating our conceptions in definition and comprehension. Induction. Enumerative induction is simple counting of the extents in existence. Counting is at the root of reason, to count, to collect, and gather. With the root. Now if you look into leg and logos, that's where the root of counting comes from in ratio, reasoning, thought, logos, speaking, they're all related. And this is at the root of dialogue. So dialogue, again, log, and dialect, lect, log and lect are from leg and logos, and they have to do with collecting and gathering and counting, which is reason. So at the root of dialogue and dialect, which both mean to speak across. This includes dialectical induction, which leads to deduction and continued feedback to verify the possible proposition of compatible terms for greater consistency, strength, and solidity. Intuitive induction is the recognition of self-evident truths about reality. Sensory data relates to the specific person inducting that part of reality, such as the green of grass being seen. There is no proof of green, it is intuited from what we see. Another person who is blind, who would not have the same sense experience and not be able to identify and recognize green in the grass before their body, for they would not see it nor be capable of inducing recognition of green from reality. They can't see it because they're blind. They don't have the capacity to induce green from reality. They have no comprehension of green. All it is a word with a specific meaning that other people can describe to them, but they have no direct intuited sense apprehension because they're missing the sense to apprehend it. A general proposition is intellectual, not sensory, and can be understood without specific senses. So when you explain green to someone, they don't need the senses. They can possibly understand the general consensus, even though they've never seen the color or the concept. Most grass is green can be understood, even if the grass before you cannot be seen to be green if you are blind. It most likely is green, and you can feel it under your feet to know it is grass. So you can make a general understanding of what grass is. You can explain to a blind person what grass is. They'll never see grass, but they can feel it with their feet, they can feel it with their hands. And from that understanding, you say all grass is green, or most grass is green. So whenever they feel grass, they'll understand that the thing they're feeling is also the color green, even if they've never seen it. So that's where we get from specifics and particulars to the general and universal. The senses aren't required for the general universal. Deduction. Identification of reality leads to being able to create definitions for these aspects of being. The logical syllogism infers an aspect of reality from existing propositions or premises. The classic example is, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. And all men are mortal is the major premise, which is the universal general. Socrates is a man, the minor premise. So we're talking about all men is the universal. Socrates is one man, the particular. So from the major and the minor, you draw your conclusion. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So go study this on your own. There's many different types of syllogism. This is just introductory into an aspect of deduction. So there's more to understand if you want to understand it. If any of the initial premises are false, then we will never end up with an accurate conclusion with consistency and integrity. And I also have more detailed explanation of induction and deduction in the 2.5-hour presentation on metaphysics, language and reality, fundamentals of the Trivium. I believe it's infographic 11 or 12 that has induction and deduction explained in more detail. Dialectic is a logical mode having a conversation with ourselves, an inner dialogue for the most part. We can externalize our thoughts and have a dialogue with another to seek truth and remove contradictions with the help of others. Once we have removed a contradiction, we can gather more data. We infer an error and then need more data to get closer to the truth. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. That is to say, definition. Using the general big picture to find something particular or a species in that general category, the genera, and describing its differences that make it what it is and not something else. That's identity. The next section is 5.2, the grammar logic spiral. So this is continued from part 1. where I have the two planes, where we have reality that we induce from, the grammar, data input, the smaller particulars, and we go up the spiral towards finding the truth in the larger universals, the logic, and the processing. And then we can deduce back down from those universals back down to the particulars to verify them in reality even more, to see if our conception of truth is accurate. So we go back up and down. That's just a summary of the infographic. I'll just a quick summary, 2 paragraphs from the previous part 1. The feedback between thought and emotion is akin to feedback between inductive and deductive reasoning or logic. Grammar of initial thinking is inductive and intuitive, while derivation inference logic is deductive and possibly of a higher order. We abstract commonalities as possible universal truth and verify if indeed they are true or not by looking closer at the differences and again at more commonalities and so on. Emotions feed back with thoughts just as logic feeds back with grammar, and eventually they generate enough care to will ourselves into the motivation to act. Induction cannot be separated from deduction in real life, as they both help us understand reality and are part of living and making decisions. Logic is the art of valid inference. Inference is a thought process itself, but we seek valid thought. The study of the syllogism deduction is where we start to order our mind to tend to not accept contradictions, to be able to recognize contradictions as fallacies. Example, there is an event that is induced into your experience. You identify a problem with the event through deductive inference. To form the solution, you use induction. Your solution can be deduced by someone else to determine its validity. Deductions refine approximations to get closer to a detailed clarity and precision. That's from part 1.2, Grammar and Logic in Reality. Logic is the light that shines upon the darkness of uncertain but possible intuition. The right brain, general holistic big picture from intuitive induction, aided by the left brain, higher logic of deduction. People can get to know themselves this way, by applying general principles of the mind and psychology, to their own lives and deduce the reality of their own condition. This is part of alchemy, the Trivium method and natural law expressions. Synthesis, intuitive induction, is so much easier than analysis, deduction to remove contradictions. Putting things together is easy. It's part of more basic thinking. Logic level 1. Taking things apart and verifying them, reorganizing things, that is harder mental work. Logic level 2. People have much ease in mashing things together into concepts and accepting them, but they don't do the harder work to verify if those concepts are even founded in truth, to see if they have a basis in truth at all. The harmony inherent in the universe is not that everything gets along. Harmony in the universe specifically is the result of non-contradiction between the ability to exist as a thing when within itself and not being something else that would make it not it. It is not that there is no conflict existing anywhere in the universe. Clearly, conflicts exist both in the world and in ourselves. Contradictions are created in the imaginal mind of man through misinterpretations of our own doing. Logic, the art of non-contradiction, is used to minimize these errors in conceptual thought. It brings all of the valid and true relationships and correspondences about reality that we symbolize through language into harmony so that they can connect and form a pattern, a web, a big picture. Section 5.3, Thought and Consciousness. This is an addendum continued from part 1 and 2. The evolution of consciousness into greater thought is part of higher order consciousness capacities that leads to greater morality. Subsection 5.3.1, Contradiction and Unity Consciousness. Unity consciousness is not a whole-scale thing, just like left and right brain imbalance is not a whole thing, it fluctuates. And this, I have a link to my previous post, an infographic on left-right brain balance and imbalance in the mind and heart. Now it's not a whole thing, you're never wholly imbalanced, you're just out of the extreme imbalances, and that's what matters the most, is to not be in those extreme imbalances. So you can check out that infographic and article. Well, there's only a little bit of words. It's pretty much an infographic. So it fluctuates, the unity consciousness and the left-right brain thing. It works on an individual particular basis, case by case, event by event. That's how you're in unity, is case by case, particular basis, event by event. When things happen, that's when you know when you're in unity consciousness, when you have to think and feel about something and then act upon it. If you accept lies as truth and live them integrated as the unity of your thoughts, emotions, and actions, then you will have a form of, quote, unity consciousness, but not unity with reality, with what is right, good, and true. You will be in contradiction with authentic reality, but you will not see it as such, as the, quote, reality you accept is actually an unreality, and this unreality you are not in contradiction with. So you think all is fine in your unreality. Ignorance can create unity consciousness, where your thoughts, emotions, and actions are in harmony, in certainty with the wrong actions you are doing, but they are not in harmony with reality in that case. It is not a unity consciousness in the true sense. Unity consciousness must be coupled with unity or alignment with reality to produce a proper navigation of reality and true unity consciousness. The basic level of consciousness is stimulus response, a programmed response, programmed by nature or something else, with no memory or lesson of that stimulus response relationship. Repeated stimulus responses can modify future responses. This is a plant operating according to programmed algorithms. No thought expressions like animals for interactivity and mobility in the world. Animals have more memory and lesson learning behavior, although apparently not as powerful as human animals though. This is required to understand natural moral law, wrongs, righting those wrongs, developing a memory of evil, learning lessons, etc. Plants are not animals. Humans are animals. But we can evolve beyond lower consciousness modalities to more greatly embody principles of truth, love, good, right, morality, etc. We can choose to learn lessons from knowledge and memory rather than continue existing. We can choose to learn lessons from knowledge and memory rather than continue in existing programmed behavior to perpetuate falsity and limitation. Most people are in a programmed behavioral modality of living in this primary mode of consciousness of basic stimulus response without the necessary thinking to process and understand what is happening. The environment and the control system provides man with signal inputs, and we output programmed responses because we have been conditioned to limit our thinking and conditioned to behave in certain ways within the limits that are imposed upon us, right or wrong. We currently don't determine objective truth and objective morality for ourselves. We get told what is and accept it. We get lazy in mind and consciousness, or lazy in mind or consciousness expressions if we don't develop the ability to think for ourselves and figure things out on our own. The next level of consciousness involves memory for the storing of knowledge so that we can share and build on it. And I have an infographic. This is a redoing of my Circle of Life initial infographic. This one is causality, consciousness, choice, and trivium. It has a few more things added. I need to combine those two to make a new one, new and improved, better version. But it's just to represent how we use our five senses and the sixth sense of consciousness, and how we interact with reality and how we generate in reality and how reality affects us. So sowing the causes and reaping the effects. Anyways, lots of information. Check out the Circle of Life presentation with the infographic for the audio presentation on this, or else you can just look at the information in the infographic, and if you know enough about natural law and trivium and causality, then you'll be able to figure out how it works. If not, go look at my presentation on the circle of life. So the next level of consciousness involves memory for the storing of knowledge so that we can share and build on it. To take in information with the five senses, process it with the sixth sense of the consciousness, and use the information actively or proactively to move around and interact with the environment. The higher order consciousness of humans can express and demonstrate more memory, more teachability, more learning capacity than non-human animals. Most of us as humans spend our time in the basic perceptual level of consciousness, being mostly awareness of taking in the surroundings of the environment. This is the grammar input. Knowledge and memory leads to our greater conceptual mental life, the next level of consciousness. We first live in awareness and stimulus response, then bring in our higher order thought and emotions to motivate us to act on an array of choices after we process our reality and understand it better. This increase in options and choices for actions in the world is not benign, but brings with it the possibility to create not only the greater good, but also the greater evil. This is a heavy responsibility that most of us are not living up to, because we willingly choose to not seek to know and understand truth and morality to greater depths, levels, and degrees. The conceptual level of thinking is voluntary, requiring volition or will. And I've mentioned this in part 2, I think. I can't remember. On the importance of how logic is not completely voluntary. There's a basic aspect of deduction, but it's very minimal. The power of the conceptualizing comes in the volition and the voluntary aspect of our will. Because when we induce grammar and we just induce general ideas, that's pretty easy, that's pretty basic though. And then when we have the deduction to verify them, that's when it gets more complicated. And then to complexify it even more, abstractions of abstractions, even more complex conceptions, that's all volitional and willing. It doesn't happen automatically. Only the very, very basic aspects of inducting reality and possible deduction to verify some minor aspects are done in most people. These capacities are not developed very well at all for most people. So the conceptual level of thinking is voluntary, requiring volition or will. Percepts are automatic. You open your eyes and you see. A noise is made and you hear it. They are automatic acquisitions, and some make an impression that is held in memory relative to the context of activity you were doing at that time. Then in mind, you can proactively model and juxtapose various percepts and concepts together and then test it out in reality. Are your perceptions, thoughts, and conceptions in harmony with reality around you? Concepts are abstractions about things in reality. The power of the mind consciousness is in building abstractions from other abstractions to form new concepts from previous concepts and continue to learn, grow, improve, evolve, etc. Non-automatic volitional conceptual thought puts ideas together, induction, or pulls them apart, deduction. We take a general observation, and in an attempt to explain it, we need to take it apart into components. If broken apart and explained properly, then the conception demonstrates a certain degree of veracity towards an aspect of truth. Subsection 532, ratio. This is an addendum continued from the article Words, Reality, and Proportions, because proportions are ratios. The essence of man can be said to be our great ability to perceive and use ratios as a rational, reasonable thinking being. Perceiving ratios in nature allows us to design images and objects in our minds. If the designs are accurate and in harmony with natural laws, we can reproduce the image into reality. The prime ratio, the first subtext of substance, is cause and effect. a 1-to-1 ratio, correlating man's existence to reality. Existence and consciousness, along with cause and effect, are axiomatic foundations to our existence. Coming to know ratios allows us to manipulate our environment and construct things from nature. Man finds and uses ratios with rational thought. Also, consciousness recognizes patterns and replicates them. Ratios are detectable through patterns occurring over and over to elucidate the existence of the ratio or proportion within reality that manifests the repeating pattern of ratio, or of that ration. We can recreate patterns that are represented by ratio. For example, I make a smoothie and do it by eye. I recreate the same pattern based on ratios and proportions of fruit and liquid to create the desired smoothie. I do not need to measure the perfect ratios, and I get a glass that is full to the rim with the smoothie, only sometimes having just a little too much that I need to remove. That was just a basic example to illustrate how we use proportions everywhere in our lives, and it's just part of our consciousness perceiving reality, and we can do things without precisely measuring them because we can measure in reality with our minds and our eyes, our senses. And I have more on measuring. I don't remember which. I think it was Tracing Reality, Visionary Quest to Wisdom. That's the article where I go into the etymology of memory and whatever I was just talking about the word. I forget. Sorry about that. Oh, measurement. Those other articles. Anyways, you can find it all on my website, evolvedconsciousness.org. Section 5.4, Images in the Mind. This is an addendum to Part 3, Occulting and Encrypting Reality Through Word Magic. The mind/consciousness is partly an image-making factory. It is the machinery to create images and symbols from thoughts and emotions feeding back from processing reality. We create self-images and worldview images. These become reflected into our ways of thinking, living, and doing. These images come from reality, or what we perceive, conceive, and understand as reality, or as quote reality, if others create false images for us to accept. Falsity and unreality becomes quote reality. The worldview of reality and the self-image of our ego personality identity construct get formed/shaped from the social environment we live in and are imposed with the images of. Most of the images, concepts, and ideas in the minds of humanity are simply there for complacency. If you are satisfied with your way of life, then all will be well. Your image of how life functions is sustained. If life is crappy, then your image has deteriorated and you no longer see that image as valid any longer compared to what reality is showing you. Perceptions and reality conflict, and this creates internal conflict. The image can be true or a fantasy. The belief in it is what matters to those who inculcate and manipulate them into creation. Money isn't real, government isn't real, but we imbue them with power to manifest that spell into existence and curse ourselves. The more the magic spell or image is in favor with what people want or think they quote want, then they are more willing to accept the current or new conditions they live by that is representative of that image being accepted or lived by. The science of imagery can be used to show people the true state of their current condition and make them realize how wrong it is. And it can also be used for the opposite, to keep you in the spell and curse yourself, like I've been talking about. Analogies, comparisons, allegories, and metaphors can all be used to create images in our minds that can connect and correspond. The dark science of imagery is the method of creating images in the mind of people for them to believe in, accept, and envision as the way, quote, reality is. The majority of images in our minds of the reality we see is initially perpetuated or molded by the dark occultist priests to maintain the illusory image of the power structure they created and control with. We are conned and fooled like a magic trick, manipulated into mind control and limited programs of behavior to continue participating in our own enslavement. Watch the movie The Hunger Games: Mockingjay Part 1. From the beginning of the movie, it is about a battle between two sides creating two competing images or symbols to influence the minds, a mind virus, of the masses in order to move them in a specific direction. Rhetoric and emotional appeals are effective in image creation of worldviews and self-concepts, both to appeal to falsity or truth, to slavery or justice. People can be inspired into falsity or truth. This movie also displays the attachment and identification we have to personal relationships and how it compromises our ability to serve and stand for truth and morality. We don't do what is right, good and true because we are too attached to others and ourselves. In addition to the false images and worldviews we are attached to that prevent actualization and realization of truth or of making a moral world. That is seen in the previous movies as well, in the previous two Hunger Game movies, where attachment prevents the main character from actualizing the greater responsibility to serve truth and morality. The sacrifice. The more perverse things get, the more easily the evil can be seen. We are currently progressing towards more perversity, but still retain a semblance of sanity through the numerous false images we are inducted with. It's harder to see, and hence harder to change, but easier to change things now if we want to, while later it will be easier to see the evil, and hence easier to change, but harder to change the perverted, chaotic condition the world will be in because of how deep into evil it will be. The vision to see reality is difficult, but the condition easier to change right now. But later, the vision will be easy, yet the condition difficult to change. We need images in our mind to motivate us, to stir emotions, to stir the, quote, heart. Without images in mind, without imagination, there is very little motivation. Motivation is to do something. If that is something to do, motivation is to do something. If that is something to do, then we are currently not doing it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be wanting to do it, we would already be doing it. So if you're motivated to do something, are you already doing it? Are you currently motivated, or do you need motivation to do it? It's either you're doing it and you don't need the motivation because you're already motivated, or you're not doing it yet and you need the motivation in order to do it. So to do something else other than what we are currently doing. This can be viewed as something new. Something new requires imagination to be thought up first, felt, and then motivated to act upon. Images can be inculcated into other minds without any critical thinking or logical processing of the image to determine its veracity, if it is an illusion or not. The creation and manipulation of images, along with the limitation of imagination, is a powerful methodology for mind control. Logic and understanding how to use it correctly, both in analysis and synthesis, is required to progress in comprehending reality. Section 5.5, Meaning and Definition of Reality. This is an addendum to Part 3, Occulting and Encrypting Reality Through Word Magic. After the initial input of the symbols and words, logic is assigning grouping and ordering to letters to make them take on meaning and provide understanding about reality where only arbitrary symbols were used before. We remove contradictions in our definitions of reality. Remove the artificial unreal to find and see that which is real. Contradictions only exist in man's mind, not nature. Definition is the identifier for how we reference and understand reality. If you fail to define a word properly or understand what it means, then your reference to something real will be skewed and incorrect. The word used is describing a part of reality. If the word is not described properly, you are occulted from the true meaning of the word, as it is intended to represent reality. Definition is the, quote, heart of logic. As it gets to the core of our understanding of reality, definitions point to the nature or essence of a word or concept. Definition brings meaning to symbols which reference reality in some way. A definition is to definite a meaning from reality, to set limits and boundaries to symbols as they reflect limits and boundaries of existent particulars in reality. To have infinite meaning is to have no meaning, with everything meaning the same thing. There's just idiots who want to say that, oh, well, definitions are bad, they limit your understanding of reality. No, that's the purpose of a word, is to specifically reference one thing in reality so that we can get a clear understanding. Rather than use 10 words to reference a million things, or 100 words to reference a million things, if we had one word for one thing, it'd be clearer. Anyways, this is about the people who go into pseudo-etymological discoveries and want to say that, ooh, well, definitions are limitations. Yeah, that's right, that's what they do. They definite a word so that a word doesn't mean everything in the universe. It means a specific thing. I can't believe how idiotic some people are. There is a need to establish common conceptual ground within ourselves as well as others when we communicate. The solution to the problem of semantic misunderstandings, contradictions, and confusion in our minds and in our reciprocal communication with others is to properly define our terms that reference aspects of reality. So I've spoken about this in the previous parts on semantic misunderstandings. It's not really in the article. I went on a side note elaboration on semantic misunderstandings and the importance of defining your terms and coming to the same page of understanding, the same definitions in order to talk about the same thing, or else you're on divergent pathways and you're not talking about the same thing, and then more confusion and more conflict arises because terms weren't defined properly. People don't have an accurate descriptive symbolic reference for reality. To continue, if I define the term X as ABC, but you define the term X as BCD, then we are not on the same page nor the same path, so we cannot even be talking about the same thing, despite having some similarities in the conception. So despite me saying X is ABC and you is X is BCD, well, we have B and C that's in common, but it's still not the same thing. It's still different. So just in shooting out the words, and we say X, well, you hear X, and when I say X, I think ABC, and you hear X, so you think BCD, and we keep talking about the thing, and we think we're talking about the same thing because we have a similarity. We have the BC in common, but he doesn't realize I have also A, and I don't realize he's thinking D. So we just have BC in common, and so we're going to be talking about things, and it seems like we're talking about the same thing, but we're not talking about the same thing because it's not the same. Anyways, go look into semantic misunderstandings and the importance of words in order to understand. I see this all the time in Facebook groups. People are arguing about capitalism. They don't even know what it means. They want to associate it with free markets. People are arguing about morality. They're arguing about so many things. They're not even defining their terms, first of all. And it just snowballs. And argument after argument, counterpoint after counterpoint. They're not even going to the foundational issues, the foundational core root causal conflict and confusion, which is in the term, in the word that defines reality. Go back to the original source words that you're using to describe a concept and hash that out. Take some time and hash out the original concept first. I've been doing it. I explain what capital is. Capital has nothing to do with free market. Unless your prime important, most important thing in your life is goods and services, then you put free market as the most important thing in your life. For me, it's truth and morality. That's my capitalism. It has nothing to do with a free market, has nothing to do with goods and services. My capitalism has to do with truth and morality. I have an article, From Capital to Capitalism. It's a false proxy to enslave ourselves. We just believe that. Anyways, go look into the word. Capital has nothing to do with goods and services. See, people don't understand etymology. They're not going into the source meanings of the word. They just, oh, capitalism means free market, good and services. Yeah, that's what it means. There's nothing evil about that. Well, when you put that as your most important thing, goods and services is the most important thing in your world, well, hello, that's materialism. That's an obsession over bullshit in your life, over fucking goods and services. Who cares? Truth and morality is what matters most. Anyways, that's a side rant on semantic misunderstandings and I guess other related topics, and how people don't even understand the words they use properly. And then there's confusion, and confusion compacted on confusion, and it just snowballs. And that's what I see everywhere. No one understands the importance of language and how it reflects reality. Or, not no one, but very few people. Very few people. So words matter. Words matter. If someone takes the time to define the terms in their argument, their proposition, they will be able to see if there are contradictions within the structure of their argument. If there are errors, the proposition needs to be revised and corrected. Errors which are falsities are falsities are a negative, and the negative holds the field in logic. So if you have an error in your proposition is not right, because error, negative, falsity holds the field in logic. So if you're trying to logically prove a proposition, if one of your premises is false, well then your proposition is going to be false. You have to make sure the things that create, the particulars that create your conception are actually grounded in reality and are verifiably true. Otherwise your proposition is just going to be suppositional. It's going to be speculative. It won't have, you're just inventing an idea without any substantial basis in reality. Anyways, to continue. The parts to definition, in essence, are providing a positive statement with positive terms, describing what a concept is, not what it is not, where possible. Although it is often easier to understand something in the apophatic negative of what it is not. I'll be describing why we should describe things in the positive whenever possible, and it relates to crime, you'll see. The definition also describes genera, general commonalities, class, similarity, the universals, and it also describes the differentia, the essentials, distinctions, and the individuals. So define what something is in the positive when possible, rather than what it is not, the negative. A negative, in terms of the absence of something, cannot be proven. In definition, you want to state a positive affirmation for the reason that they are verifiable, because we can verify the positive affirmations. Because it's something that is. You can't prove something that is not. A negative, something doesn't exist, you can't prove it because it is not. You can't prove someone didn't do a crime, a negation. You have to prove that someone did do a crime. Because you could say that the 7 billion and the people on the earth, prove that you didn't murder JFK or something. You can't prove that you didn't do something. Prove that you didn't do this. Prove that you can't do that. You have to prove a positive. That's why definitions should, in the most optimal sense, be used in a positive connotation, because you're actually affirming something that is, rather than denying something that is not. Or trying to prove something that is not, I mean. You're affirming something that is, rather than trying to negate something that you're saying never happened. How can you say, you're guilty, and you have to prove that you're not guilty? I'm accusing you of guilt, and you have to prove that you're not guilty. Well, how can you prove something that doesn't exist? Say the person never did the crime. How can you prove that someone didn't do the crime? You can only prove something that actually exists, which is why definitions should be in the affirmative. Should. But you can use the negative and the apophatic, and it is valid in a lot of cases. It's just when you're trying to prove something, you prove something that is, you don't prove something that isn't. You don't say, I'm going to prove the non-existence of God. That's folly. That's idiocy. You can't prove the non-existence of something. You can only prove that something does exist. Alright, so I'll move on from that. Induction seeks out the general genus, the sameness in the particular individuals that have it in common. Deduction is the differentiated species, uniqueness, special place in the class being looked at. Analogies are comparisons and are metaphors, personifications, allegories, and similes. They are inducted abstractions which are universal and general in nature. A particular individual that is unique cannot itself be described except in reference to the universals that it has, either in common or difference with others. An explanation, which is to make clear, interpret, expound, flatten out, is an important step past the initial implications, where we entangle, interweave, connect, and fold in different particulars, we make from direct awareness, inference, or analogy in comparing what we observe in reality. Prior to written records of data storage to preserve knowledge, explanations were hard to come by because concepts could only be stored in consciousness and shared with others through speech. So people mostly shared the implications, what they entangled in reality, the interweaving, the connections, what they folded in, and they shared that. But the explanation to explain why that was true and further develop on these implications of reality, well, that was few and far between because those capacities were not more developed in people's modalities of consciousness and ways of living. People created many beliefs from what they saw around them without much of a method for verifying it. Aristotle described such a method for veracity, known as deductive logic. Deductive logic starts with the cause and why, with a pre-existing database or knowledge base to support it. Concrete particular examples need to be known to substantiate the causal relations and explain the connections in reality that we use to derive universal concepts. The last section is 5.6, Logic and Reality. Logic asks, does it follow? Logic is the art of valid inference, the process of correct thought. A valid inference is to take out the contradictions. Other people imply something to you, and you infer from them what they are saying about reality. The Trivium method is a framework that reflects how our minds work. Take in knowledge, grammar, remove contradictions, logic, and speak it back out into the real world, rhetoric, refined in clarity and understanding. The true art of logic eventually leads to shadow inner work. The true art of logic eventually leads to shadow inner work. This is the purpose of learning about the Trivium method, natural law expressions, and alchemy. The art of deduction of the self is about reduction and... The art of deduction of the self is about the reduction of untruth, falsity, or non-contradiction. Something does not follow because it does not fit or belong there. We only keep what fits to build particular puzzle. We only keep what fits to build a particular puzzle. That is alchemy and natural law alignment with reality. Logic is the most important part and requiring the most effort. Looking to assimilate info. That's hard, is it? Just look, and in it goes. Assimilation of grammar is not difficult, although it does involve time. What is difficult is the processing of the information, even in data collection, parcel processing through induction, which is a form of logic. If we can't make sense of the data or understand it, then it's worthless to us right now. We might as well read Chinese characters and not understand them. If we don't understand what the symbol means, it's worthless at the time for us to understand reality through that symbol. Grammar, without the understanding provided through logic, is only helpful to navigate the obstacles of survival and live in the environment, in a basic stimulus-response state of being. With time, we could possibly deduce what a symbol means in another language. Logic is the central power of the Trivium method. The logic of induction in grammar allows us to create ideas and concepts. The logic of deduction allows us to take them apart and verify if they actually make sense and are repeatable, or if it was a mistaken error of not enough data in grammar input. Logic is in the middle of the Trivium for a reason. We can't get to know we have a valid output until we verify the input. Logic is not first in the Trivium process, but it is the most important. Without the input of grammar, you have nothing to process. It all starts with input and grammar, but you get nowhere if you don't process it correctly. You will just be a robot in stimulus response of preconditioned behavioral programming. The induction-deduction spiral again is: input percepts induce logically the data to get to the general universals inside the particular aspects of reality, to get to the essence, the form. Verify the general universal by deducing its universality in the specific particulars of reality. Most people cannot reach step 2 of processing correctly because they have not been doing the step 1 effectively, which is the input of the various information out there to make sense of reality. The amount of information is too enormous, and they don't even want to start to do that work. Even when people get to the processing, they are not filtering out information that is false, contradictory, unnecessary, distracting, or has nothing to do with the solving of the problem we say we want to solve. There is so much garbage as part of the information field that people don't even want to intake any information. Most people can't get through step 1 input properly because the truth is such a needle in a stack of needles, they think they will never find it even if they look. Logical processing is required to filter bullshit and useless information, that which is a distraction, unnecessary, or counterproductive to... Logical processing is required to filter bullshit and useless information, that which is a distraction, unnecessary, or counterproductive, that which prevents us from getting where we need to get to, towards true freedom, prosperity, order, and peace. Processing can also be likened to an antivirus to prevent specific corruptions we took in from mixing into our operating system in life, to prevent bullshit from getting in, to keep garbage out from the mental food we want to consume. A spam filter process can also be used, as it is not an antivirus. We want to filter crap coming in before we store it to memory for recall and output. Sometimes stuff gets through and taken in, which then needs the antivirus to scan and remove it. The antivirus scans what we have already taken in, finds the corrupt mind virus, and then quarantines it in the system. Input and output without processing is simply robotic programs running, no true thinking, only thought within the programmed limits. Grammar is first in order, as without input there is nothing to process. Logic is required the most, and is first in importance. Logic gets us to keep going back to grammar for more data once we see that we lack data to properly understand reality. The logic antivirus is the fallacy detection kit. It scans the data taken in for consistency and error, non-contradiction. It's looking for consistency, error, and contradiction. It's looking to make non-contradiction. Failure to process data correctly will result in a failure to understand reality correctly, a failure to discern greater aspects of truth. This is why we have people engaging in action prematurely, misguided, only partially in right action, yet also still in wrong action, which never produces the right results in the end. This is why we have people going around on numerous issues and other, quote, reforms of controlled external gradualism, focusing on secondary manifestations and symptoms without tackling the causal human consciousness that is the root of the problem. Logic is concerned with truth, therefore also untruth, and the negation of truth, which attempts to obfuscate truth, haze the light, and entrench us into darkness. Contradictions are untruth and unreal. Logic is the art of non-contradiction, of removing contradictions, which is also concerned with the removal of falsity and fallacies that represent the negation or obfuscation of truth. Falsity prevents truth from being grasped, the light from being seen, and clarity from being obtained. Contradiction leads to the darkness of untruth through the negation of the ability to find truth in the cloudy muck of doublethink unreality of that contradictory mind. The task of thinking correctly, of removing contradiction and fallacies, is not desired by most people because they are set in stone in their beliefs, entrenched in the darkness of calcified ego, and do not want to change their worldview, self-image, or ego-personality identity construct. It is also some of the hardest work there is to do, as it takes much time, attention, energy, effort, dedication, determination, and persistence. Cognitive dissonance keeps people holding on to their contradictions for the most part, as they do not listen to the emotional cues and signals telling them about their unreality. The feelings of unease and anger can tell you about falsity in your life. It is not always anger at the truth we don't want to face for making us confront the lies in ourselves. The anger can be at the lie someone is speaking as well. So it's not always anger at our inability to face the truth that we want to deny reality. Sometimes it's anger at people who are lying to us. It's just the cues, the emotional cues need to be looked at honestly with respect to reality to see, well, is it a cognitive dissonance in me where I'm refusing truth, or is it a cognitive dissonance where someone's talking bullshit and I'm just having emotional responses of facing the falsity now that I understand truth, and it's just so disgusting that it upsets you. There's different cues for anger and different ways of understanding things. It's not always, oh, it's always the other person, they're making me mad. No, sometimes it's you're so full of shit and you're attached to it that you can't see that they're speaking truth and it's making you mad because you're attached to your falsity. So you think they're speaking lies, but they're speaking truth, but you don't want to face it because you haven't developed self-respect, self-love, self-knowledge, and self-responsibility. So, that's what I'm talking about here. Honest self-respect and responsibility to truth must be used to be curious, doubt, and question our perceptions of reality. We can ask ourselves questions, or others, argue with others or ourselves. Curiosity is not a chore, but a motivation to know and understand even more. The Trivium builds discerning judgment. Contradictions can be detected. Then we can find the source that caused them and correct these errors. This will help to produce an uncluttered and ordered mind. For most people, this intuitive process is only briefly engaged in for the base functions of living. But making the process explicitly understood helps us refine our ability to use these intuitive tools we have. We are fallible beings, and we must know the wrongs to make the right choice. Wisdom is knowledge and understanding to be used in the objective world as right action. Otherwise, it's not wisdom. It's only internal understanding not being actualized and realized in reality. It just stays within you and goes nowhere. Making the right choice, doing the right thing, is wisdom, because you take the knowledge and understanding up and apply it in your life. Contradictions and inconsistencies are the result of a failure to identify reality accurately and lead to wrong actions from living in falsity, unreality. Logic brings the internal subjective realm into alignment with the objective rhythm of reality to produce harmonious external manifestations, right action. Now that tells you the importance of logic. Logic, as I've said before, I keep saying it, logic is the law of the universe. It's a supreme law. Everything abides by it, and if you don't abide by it, you live in contradiction, confusion, control, and chaos. Logic is supreme. It's how we can find truth that is inherent in reality and ourselves, is through logic. Anyways, that's the end of my presentation. That's the last part of the 5-part series on language and reality. Thank you very much for your time and attention if you've chosen to listen to these audios instead of reading the articles. I guess I'll be looking for something else to do now, for doing my natural moral law, big article, or some other notes to release. Anyways, I got plenty of work to do. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it, even though I don't know who you all are that listened. This is all important information to learn. Share it, spread it, reformulate it, just get it out there. The importance of thought, logic. It's sad when you look at the capacity of people to process reality and how desperately they need to understand this stuff. Anyways, thank you again for your time and attention. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Just want this information to get out to people. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.